Good morning. I got up this morning with the intention of ironing paper while I drank my coffee, which I did do some. And then I realized that I should be showing you guys this since it's easier to show you than the actual dyeing process. I did a pan full of tea dyed paper yesterday. So this is my vintage enameled roasting pan or baking dish. And I just simply start with a paintbrush of tea on the bottom of the pan. I place a piece of paper into that tea and then I brush over the top of it, and I keep layering it up like that, just brushing the tops and letting the bottom seep up the extra tea from the layer below it. And then every once in a while, I'll throw in one of these stencils. Now this only works if you're gonna leave it to sit overnight and dry naturally. You can't put these stencils in the oven because it's plastic and the oven will melt it. That's what happened to this guy. He's melted because he dripped over the edge of the baking rack. So it's not drying. I thought by the time I woke up this morning, at least the top page would be dry, but it wasn't. It was still firmly embedded in the page below it. So I thought, well, I can iron them dry and while I have my coffee, and usually I don't get any crafting done in that first hour. So this way I am. So I've already had a coffee and dried a few pages with the iron. I really didn't feel like doing a whole page standing in the kitchen. So that's how much I've got dried already with my coffee. I didn't feel like standing in the kitchen all day and running the oven for 5 minutes at a time. It does dry by itself then, but then I've found that I still want to iron it anyway. So I think this may be my preferred method from now on. It's just a little easier on the body and probably on the electrical bill. I'm going to be running the iron for quite a while, but I don't think it takes as much heat as the oven. And I don't think it will take as long either. So these are fairly damp. I'm gonna take this next stencil off. Because they're damp and it is copy paper, it's pretty fragile. So you kind of have to just be careful not to tear the paper. Now this isn't giving me what I had hoped for in terms of color from the stencils. So I may have to try it again with coffee. But any of the videos that I've seen, they've said to leave it just overnight. And that's what I did. I did this process yesterday afternoon while I sat outside and got some sun. And then I left it just in the sun for an hour or two, and then brought it in the house overnight and just set it. I maybe could have had the fan blowing on it, but I didn't think to do that. Might be a plan. I think this will work a lot better in the winter when our house is really dry. But it doesn't take long at all to iron these dry. The only problem is I'm finding they're curling on me, which they didn't really do so much. When they dry in the oven, they curl up a bit, but then when you iron them, they flatten. Well, this one's not doing too bad. Some of them have really curled on me. But you're getting some beautiful color, even though I'm not getting the stencil really showing up. It's giving me great color, so I'm not too worried about it. It's all a great experiment. Now I'm taking the next few pages, and they're very wet. So when I first started this morning, I set my iron right on it, and it made like the imprint of the iron. It's not going to do it now. I think it's if this is very cold and wet and the iron is very hot, you really can see that sort of a scorch mark. So that's why I grabbed a sheet of parchment paper. And I'm just using the parchment paper until the paper has evaporated a little bit of its water. And then it's a little more durable to run the iron right on it. And just letting it dry, let it air out a bit, let that steam evaporate. I don't want to trap it underneath the parchment. So then you can see the color changing already. I'll flip it over. Do some from the other side. This is at least 2 sheets that I'm ironing together. And once they're drier, they'll separate easily. Right now, they would probably tear if I tried to take them apart. So this is a nice, relaxing thing to do. People that know me would probably laugh their head off because I rarely iron. I mean, in this day and age, we hardly do have clothes that need it, right? Anything that really needs to be pressed proper, I take to the cleaners and get it done. But that's the privileged world we live in. See, my ironing pad is even damp underneath. I think it's strong enough now, dry enough that I can just carefully run this over. I still don't want to be going like crazy. But this is something you could certainly do while you watch TV. I mean, isn't that the classic image of the housewife ironing in front of the soap operas? Of course, I don't have my soap operas on, but if I wasn't talking to you, I'd have my YouTube on. Just a different era. And I think this is a 3rd page in the center, so that's good. I'm getting 3 pages in one operation here. And so I figured you might as well do 2 or 3 at a time rather than waste that heat from the iron on just one paper. You're actually giving some heat to the papers below it. See, now that one's curled up quite a bit. So I'll just go from the opposite side and try to flatten it out a bit before I put it in the pile. And that works pretty good. And you can still see a bit of damp on this edge. Flip that over. Love the color on this piece. And the ironing doesn't really get all of the wrinkles out. I suppose if that was really important, you could dampen it with a spray bottle and get it perfectly flat and crisp. But I think this is part of the charm of the tea and coffee dyed paper, is that it's a little crinkly and not so perfect. I think what I would like to try on my next coffee dyeing venture is tearing the edges before I dye, because what happens when you set it and let it sit is those torn edges, or the edges of the paper, get quite dark, and I think that that would be really cool to have them naturally dark instead of having to ink them. Now here I tried inserting this stencil to see if I could get the bee design. Let's see if it came through. Grab a couple of pieces. I don't think it's going to. I don't see anything. Now when I put the stencils in, I did just what I've seen other YouTubers do. I brushed some more tea over the stencil to hopefully leave some, you know, in the gaps of the stencil that will dye the paper more in those areas. But I don't think it's worked on this batch. I have had it work before. I've had it work just with paper doilies, so I'm surprised it's not working with the stencils. But maybe paper doilies is the way to go. Then I would get tea-dyed paper doilies out of the deal. So that's done pretty good for the top sheet. I'm adding a lot of steam into the air with this method. I'm just going to flip it over. That's beautiful. I think there's 3 pieces here too. Finding this quite enjoyable to do. I am wishing I had brought another coffee in. Need to cut down on the coffees in the morning. And usually it's darker on one side than it is on the other. It's pretty normal. But see how the edges, they get that extra bit. They seem to soak it up more, just like the end grain of wood would do to stain. So I think if it was a torn edge, it would soak it up even more because it would be more porous. That's lovely. And then I just loosely pile them. That one's still a bit damp. I just loosely pile them so that they can continue to dry. I don't want them to get put away damp and end up molding. When I mixed up my tea, it was actually, I think I told you yesterday in a Christmas in July video, that I got some tea bags from my mother-in-law. I asked her to save them for me. And she uses such a weak tea. She puts her bag in, pours the water in, and takes the bag out almost immediately. So I knew there was going to be a lot of extra tea coloring still left in those bags. So I mixed up a batch with about a dozen tea bags in my 2-liter Pampered Chef batter bowl with the handle, and because it'll take hot water, like boiling water out of the kettle. I let it cool down quite a bit before I started the process. I was working on other things. And then I, like I say, I just brush it on the sheets. I have a cheap brush that I use for that, and I keep it with all my tea dyeing and coffee dyeing stuff. And I just keep layering up the papers. Usually then I sit it in the oven on about 250 or 300 and set the timer for 5 minutes. I was doing 3 minutes, but the last time I did it, it was a very hot, muggy day, and I found that I had to leave it in longer. So you'll have to play around with that. But then after the 5 minutes, usually that top layer, I use the broiler so that the heat's all coming from the top. I'll put some other pans down in the bottom of the oven just to use the extra heat to help them start to dry out. See, that gives me that sizzle. I don't really want that. I don't want it to mark it. But it's a long process. It's a lot of bending over. It's hard on my back. So I may try this with coffee next time and just see. I mean, the last time I did it, I worked from 8 till 4:30. So it's no wonder I was tired. I didn't even sit down for lunch. I was on my feet almost all day doing this, with hardly moving at all, just sort of back and forth across the room, which is hard on my body these days. But this, I can do the tea dyeing part sitting down and even outside on the porch, as long as I weight my stack of dry papers so they don't blow away. And then I can do this part the next day, or maybe even a couple of days later, depending on the humidity, and do it sitting down. So again, it's not hard on my body. I shouldn't need to rest after I play so much. So anyway, the tea had lots of juice left in it, as you can see. Give me a nice, beautiful color. And now I've re-dried those bags, those tea bags, to try to save the paper from them, and possibly the tea. You can use the tea particles for texturizing things too. So I'm probably going to save the tea once it's good and dry and stick it in a jar. I don't think I'll ever drink it, but I might craft with it. I just love the crinkly sound of those papers. And I'm I'm just carefully taking off a few layers. Now I think I've got quite a few layers here, and I've got a stencil in the middle there, so I got to dig that out. I don't want to iron over top of that. So I'm just carefully going at the edges here to try to find which layer that's in. There it is. And you can see, well, it had some black ink or something on it, so it looks like that maybe is going to show up. And that's okay. I'll take whatever it gives me. One thing I do want to do is I have not gone to Staples and looked to see what other weights of paper I can get there. Probably when back to school sales start, I'll go and check it out. But I would imagine that the really good sales are going to be on the cheap stuff, like the thin paper. But I would like to see if there's some sales on thicker paper, not cardstock, but just a thicker weight of copy paper. Although when you coffee dye or tea dye it, it does tend to thicken it up a bit. Like it absorbs, I guess, more molecules, but it just isn't as thin as it was. I guess the slight bit of crinkle that it has too helps with that. Turn this over. So you can see my iron there. I don't know if that'll go away or not. I'm just hoping to find some good designs to show you here. Yeah, that one's just very subtle. I don't know if you can see it or not. You can see it more on this one, but who knows whether you will when it's dry. So I'm not really pressing down, I'm just letting the weight of the iron do the work. Yeah, those designs are a little too subtle for my liking, but that's okay. Maybe if I do it with tea next time, I'll spray those stencils with coffee just for that extra different color. The other thing that I have done is just go back and stencil them with ink to get a design, but it's not quite the same as when it looks to be like embedded right in the paper. Still pretty though. Let's bring this over so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just grabbing at the corner. There's a stencil down below here, but I think it's quite a ways down. And there's an alphabet stencil. See if that shows up. You can see it there when it's wet, I think. I'll just see if it stays when it's dry. I would think that the heat would help it to stay, because when I put the top layer, when I layer stuff in the oven, always seems to get darker. Yeah, that's showing up, I think. Just being very careful because I don't want this to rip if it's the only one that's going to give me a design. And you see, just Even that little bit of pressure over the surface is giving me little marks. I'm just going to set this aside while I iron the other pages for a minute. Let that sort of air dry a bit. Very carefully. So I could sit and watch my favorite show and do this. I probably won't do many more videos like this unless I happen to get a batch that's showing me some great patterns and I want to show you the reveals. But I can always do that. It's just such a nice soft ivory with a slight caramel tone in some areas. I really like how it looks around the edges. Let's see how it looks when it's torn. That's beautiful. I'm going to go back to this alphabet one and see if I can get it completely dried and flattened. It might have needed a little longer, but next time maybe I'll let it sit for 2 nights. That's kind of interesting. If you can see that, just a bit of the alphabet showing. I'm going to keep that on a separate pile. It's the first one that's shown up any pattern. And that is one of the harder plastic stencils. It's still flexible, by Helix. I just pick these up wherever I see them. I don't think I've ever bought one retail except for maybe Tupperware stencils years ago I bought from my Tupperware lady. So this one may have some of the alphabet on it too. It's the one directly below it. Very wet. As we get into the center of the pile, they seem to be a little wetter. And I suppose if I wanted to give it a chance, I could leave it overnight again, what's left. There's still quite a few layers, quite a few stencils in there. And just to see if that second night really helps it. So I'm just debating whether to do that as we speak. But honestly, I think I'd rather just be done with it. Let's see, what's our time, like 23 minutes. The iron has no steam on, it's just dry iron. Of course, you don't need to add steam when it's already wet. I suppose you could, if you were trying to get the crinkles out of a dried piece, you could maybe put the steam on and that would do it rather than spraying the sheets again. Although the last time I coffee dyed, I let the sheets dry and then sprayed some more concentrated coffee on out of a spray bottle, and that gave me some really cool effects actually. So you can play around with all different techniques. So I think I will. I think I'll finish up these last 3 sheets here and then let the other stuff sit for another night just to see if it gives me better stencil patterns. I'm happy with what I have, but I just like to see if it makes a difference. And I'm sure that you're curious too, so there will be a part 2 to this video. And then one of these days, when I can set it up, actually I could set it up and do this, the wetting process in here under the camera. Next time I do some, if it's not a sunny day, I'll do that. I like to sit out in the sun and do stuff whenever it's possible. I feel like I'm a little mouse hiding in the house, and it's such a beautiful summer out there. So when a rainy day comes, the crafter in me goes, yes, I can stay inside without feeling guilty. My poor garden has just been completely ignored. It's looking lovely. It's just got lots of weeds filling in the gaps. They're not ugly weeds, but they are weeds. It makes the garden look lush and full. Okay, so I'm ending at a stencil. I'm going to leave the parchment paper sitting on top of it. No, I don't think I will. Yeah, I can. Leave the parchment paper on top of it just to try to keep that. Oh, actually, that might stop it from evaporating. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll keep this with my papers. See how much tea it took off of that. So join me on my next tea dyeing reveal video, and we'll see if leaving it an extra night makes any difference or not. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Most of all, have a great day.